Hello, we're glad you're back. And yes, I do mean we are glad. We are going to be talking today about John of Damascus. At least we're using him as sort of the overall spokesperson for what became a certain form of Christology centered in history around the Council of Chalcedon in 451. So the Chalcedonian Definition is really where we're going to start, because this is something that really anybody dealing with theology and Christology needs to understand. So let me put this up here for you. I've given one key line from the Chalcedonian Definition, and it talks about Christ who is to be acknowledged in two natures, inconfusedly, unchangeably, indivisibly, and inseparably. Now that's a lot of lingo in that bottom line there, but that's trying to say in summary that we believe that Christ is one person, two natures, and these two natures are united, you see, but they're indivisible, inseparable, the last two terms, and yet they are unconfused, unchangeable. They remain two natures. Okay, one other thing that you'll want to take away from all of this. The idea that is really drawn from the Chalcedonian Definition is what's called the hypostatic union. And by hypostasis, in this course, what we mean is person. And what we mean by the hypostatic union is in Christ, Christ's two natures were united in his one personhood. There's only one Jesus. There's only one Son of God who is the same person as Jesus Christ, the same person as the Word incarnate. Now that might seem so obvious to us because we are very Chalcedonian in our thinking, but this hypostatic union was forged in the midst of all these controversies. And out of it really comes a paradigm for Christian thinking, because not only do we talk about Jesus in terms of the hypostatic union, but what Jesus has done for us. Remember, Christology always implies soteriology. So out of Christ's own union of two natures in his one hypostasis or person, that is the union of God and humanity, divinity and humanity. It's the union, the reconciliation between these two parties. And it happens, of course, in Christ, and the result of this is our salvation. Another phrase you're going to want to know from this is two-nature Christology. And that may, again, seem somewhat of an archaic phrase, a phrase that we're not used to using today. It's not going to come up in most church work or most Sunday school classes, but it's important that you understand that what the Chalcedonian Definition gives us is two-nature Christology. We're going to see how two natures work in the next video, but for now, put this to memory, make a flashcard. Every seminary graduate ought to be able to understand what two-nature Christology is, what the hypostatic union is. I ought to be able to call you up at 2 o'clock in the morning years from now and wake you up from your deepest, darkest slumber and say, what was the Chalcedonian Definition again? And you ought to be able to just rattle off the top of your head, oh yes, that's where they gave us two-nature Christology because of the hypostatic union, the two natures united in one person. So get these terms together, get them in your head, get them in a flashcard, and then we'll move on to the next video where we start to see some of those other attempts at Christology. Okay, one last term I need to acknowledge, because this term is sometimes used as a contrast to two-nature Christology. This is the idea that comes from Philippians chapter 2. In verses 6 through 11, we have this, what's called a Christ hymn, where Christ, though in the form of God, it says he took on the form of a servant. And in the middle of this, it says in verse 7 that he emptied himself. The Greek word there is kenosis. And there's a modern idea that will reject this Chalcedonian definition. Some theologians want to say that that's too complicated. Why get into all those debates with the heresies and the concepts of nature and essence? Why not just say Christ was in the form of God, he metamorphosized or somehow emptied out all of those divine attributes like omniscience and omnipotence, and instead he just became human. Well, the early church will take very seriously this idea of kenosis because it does say Christ emptied himself, but notice he does not empty himself of divine power, divine knowledge, divine presence. He emptied himself of himself. For the early church, he remains divine, and yet he's taken on a human nature. So they would not accept any sort of metamorphosis or change in the divine nature of the Son of God. Instead, he has accommodated himself to taken up a human nature in addition. So we're going to walk through a bunch of attempts at Christology, and I say attempts because the official church, the ecumenical councils, all declared that these other attempts heretical. We're going to walk through them to see what not to say so that we can try to understand better what did the Orthodox party really get. It's called a Christ hymn, or Christ. Where are you going?